Hey, this is Mike Carpenter again, frequently and sometimes affectionately known as Mike the Money Man. I'm a licensed mortgage broker in the state of Washington, and my license number is 111356. So in this section, we're going to talk about adjustable rate mortgages, or ARMs. And people typically know what an ARM is, or they at least think they know what an ARM is. I'm going to talk about the different kind of ARMs, 3, 5, 7, and 10-year ARMs, but I'm also going to talk about the mechanics of adjustable rate mortgages and talk about how your rate adjusts after the initial fixed period, and maybe dispel a few myths about what ARMs are. So in the section on loan types and loan limits, I briefly touched on a concept called adjustable rate mortgages. And I believe that adjustable rate mortgages. And I believe that I outlined adjustable rate mortgages as follows. So a 3-year ARM, a 5-year ARM, a 7-year ARM, and a 10-year ARM. So I wanted to go and talk about the mechanics of ARMs. And I'm often asked, is an ARM worth it? Should I do an ARM? And the answer is always, it depends. So let me explain what all of this means, and then we'll get into the depends part. So the first number that you see is what I call the fixed period of the ARM. And the second number you see is the adjustment period. So let's just use an example. Typically, if a fixed rate mortgage, a 30-year fix, were say 4.5%, again, that rate doesn't represent anything close to reality and may not apply to your given situation, but we're just going to use it for illustration purposes. Typically, the smaller the adjustment period, the smaller the rate. So we might see a 10-year ARM at say 4%. Again, I'm making these numbers up. A 7-year ARM at say 3.75%, and a 5-year ARM at say 3.5%, and a 3-year fixed a 3-year ARM at say 3%. So the general rule is that the smaller the initial fixed period of the ARM, the smaller the rate will be. So let's just use a 5-year ARM as an example. And let me draw out the mechanics. Mechanics of how an ARM works. So a 5-year ARM is fixed for 5 years, and then it adjusts every year thereafter. And it may go up or down depending upon how the economy is doing. As a general rule, the worse the economic news, the better rates are. So it's fixed for 5 years at a given rate, and let's just call it just 3.75, just for no reason other than just to give it a rate for comparison. So it's fixed for that period, and then it adjusts every year thereafter. And it will adjust up or down depending upon how the economy does. And what determines the adjustment is the following. So every ARM has 2 components that determine what the future rate will be. That is something called the index and something called the margin. And the index is the variable part of the ARM, and the margin is the fixed part of the ARM. So think of the margin as, replace the word margin with profit margin. That's not really what it is, but the margin is what the lender tacks onto the index. And the margin is usually, say, 2.5%, or say 2.25%, or say 2.75%. It doesn't vary. It's always fixed throughout the entire term of the loan. But the part that varies is the index. And most ARMs are based upon something called the monthly Treasury average, or you may have heard of something called the London Interbank Offering Rate, or you may have heard of something called the 1-year T-bill. Year T-bill. So effectively what happens is at the end of this 5 years, the lender figures out what the current index rate is. Let's say it's 2%. And then they will add on top of that what their margin is, which might be, and then they add these two together and they get the rate for the next year. But that rate is only good for that year, for every month of that year. And at the end of that year period, they recalculate this and they figure out what the index is, because the index may go up or the index may go down. And then let's say the index went to 1.25%. What they do is they take 1.25% plus their margin, which gets them now 3.75%. And that rate is good for yet another year. And that goes on infinitum until the end of the term. So effectively, you know what your payment's going to be up until this point, but beyond this point, it is a great mystery. And you don't know exactly what your rate's going to be. There is something called a cap and a floor. And these are typically, say, 2% or 5%, meaning once you're done with the 5 years, if there's a 2% cap or a periodic 2% cap, it can't go up more than 2%, nor can it go down more than 2%. And there's typically a floor where it can't go below a certain point or go above a certain point. So you're generally protected up to a given point beyond this 5-year period. And if you can look up these indexes almost anywhere online. These are the typical indexes that these ARMs are based upon. You can look up history of monthly Treasury average, or you can look up the history of LIBOR or the history of 1-year T-bill, and there's plenty of sites online where you can dig up this information, and you can see a 10-year span of what these values have been over a given 10-year period. But you only know this up to a given point. Beyond that, you don't know how those indexes are going to roll out. I always say that an ARM or adjustable rate mortgage is not something that you would want to keep for the entire term. For example, if you buy a house and you think that you are going to fix it up and you're going to sell it, you might want, within a 5-year period, and if you happen to know how fast your contractors can work or whatnot, maybe a 5-year ARM might be a good bet, or a 7-year ARM. But it depends on what your window of operation is. When your window of operation is beyond the known world, then dragons lie on the other side of that. If you're certain that you're going to buy this house and your kids are going to go off to college and you're going to sell the house, then a 5-year ARM might be the way to go, or a 7-year ARM, or a 10-year ARM. And the way to determine whether or not an ARM is worth the trouble is to do the following calculation. Let's see here. Let's say that we have a 5-year ARM, and the prevailing interest rate for that 5-year ARM is, say, 3.75%. So with an ARM, you're giving up something to get something. You're giving up safety or a safe and predictable payment for presumably some savings. So that savings has to be worthwhile for you. But let's say the prevailing interest rates for 30-year fix are at, say, 4.5%. And if we take a loan amount of $400,000 at 3.75%, that principal and interest payment is going to be $18.52 and 46 cents. Hope you can see that. And the prevailing 30-year fixed rate, let's say, is 4.5. At 4.5, that is a monthly principal and interest payment of $2,026.74, or a payment difference of $174.28 per month. Now, you have to ask yourself, is $174.28 a month in savings over a 5-year period worth the risk? You take $174.26 times 12 times 3, you are saving $6,274.08. So you have to ask yourself, is $6,274.08 worth the unknown on the other side of the 5 years? If you sell the house within 5 years, you've pocketed $6,300. But if you don't, you run the risk of that $174.28 evaporating if the rates go up. As a general rule, if there's bad economic news, and this is, of course, a very simplified version, if there's bad economic news, rates go down. If there's good economic news or good news on the economic horizon, rates go up. So beyond your safety margin, you're betting that we will slip into a recession, or there'll be some sort of catastrophic economic news that will cause rates to remain low during the period that you've gone beyond your safety zone, so to speak. So when considering an ARM, you always have to do this calculation. What is the monthly savings? And what am I going to save over my window of operation within those 5 years or 7 years? So always take that into consideration when considering an ARM. There you go. And, contrary to popular misunderstanding, ARMs don't always adjust up. If the economy remains stagnant or doesn't continue to grow, or we don't add jobs, or there's other economic turmoil, then you could see this rate that you started out with, say 3.75%, it might actually go down within that first year of adjustment. And it might go down the second year of adjustment, or go down the third year of adjustment. It just depends. So it's always important to consider your window of operation when considering an ARM. So hope you found that informative. Let me know if you've got any questions. And if you'd like a chart on the history of the monthly Treasury average, or a chart on the history of the LIBOR, or the chart on the history of the 1-year T-bill, I'm happy to email that to you. Just send me an email and I'll shoot it off to you, and you can calculate your window of operation to your heart's content. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you found it useful and informative. It's intended as a broad overview of the material so that you may have some further questions. Feel free to ask them, and I'll be happy to answer them as best I can. Share, like, and subscribe, but share it with somebody who can actually use it. Maybe someone who's going through the loan process and is a little confused. Hope they get something out of it as well. So happy viewing. There's more to the series. Hope you enjoy the rest of the videos. Thank you. And now for a quick disclaimer. So these videos are intended for informational purposes only. So don't rely on them for making important financial decisions, especially decisions concerning your housing. If you've got any questions about how this information applies to your given situation or your given transaction, please contact your mortgage broker directly, and they can give you advice. And any rate, fee, cost, or loan limit information was accurate at the time that the video was made, but may not be currently accurate because underwriting guidelines change all the time. So if you've got any questions about how this information relates to you specifically, contact your mortgage broker. So I hope you continue to enjoy the series. Thanks.